You know, Alice and I are always looking to be more healthy, and we were just talking about how fasting is one of the best ways to do that, but it's so hard. But the great thing about Prolon is that's not what you're doing. It's not that you're not eating for 5 days. Instead, you're using their science-backed program to convince your body you're fasting.
You guys, this 5-day program really is amazing. It comes beautifully packaged and it does all the thinking for you. Each day is its own box. And by following their program, I know I just feel so much better. And I can't wait to experience Prolon Next Gen and continue to see results. For a limited time, you can be first in line to experience the new Next Gen at special savings. Prolon is offering the Prosecutors listeners 15% off site-wide plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day program. Just visit prolonlife.com/prosecutors. That's PROLONLIFE.com/prosecutors to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. prolonlife.com/prosecutors.
This episode of The Prosecutors is brought to you by Huggies Little Movers. Get your baby's butt into Huggies' best-fitting diaper. Huggies Little Movers. We got you, baby.
Yeah.
What's good?
I'm Brian Greenberg.
I'm Victor Rasuk.
Check out our new podcast, We Almost Made It.
You guys might remember us from HBO's How to Make It in America. And guess what? We're going to have actors, athletes, fashion designers, comedians, friends.
We're going to talk hustle, grind, anyone who had a dream and people thought they were crazy, but they chased it anyway. We want to talk about it. We also want to hear from you.
So go follow, rate, and review We Almost Made It at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast.
Go ahead and do it.
Do it.
Do it now.
I'm Brett,
And I'm Alice.
and we are The Prosecutors. Today on The Prosecutors, we continue the Ballad of D.B. Cooper. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-pilot extraordinaire, Alice.
Brett. If we're going to get hijacked, I definitely want to be co-piloting with you. But let's hope we're never flying anything and we're never hijacked.
Yeah, well, if we are, we're going out through the cockpit. We're leaving the flight attendant behind. Sorry. It was nice knowing you, but we got to get out of there. That was from Madison, by the way, another excellent student from Lidditz Elementary, who provided me so many descriptors for Alice. In addition to the art, which I've been showing off, I'm going to show some more art for those of you who are here. Just, you know, in the style of Hannah.
How great is that?
Really fantastic.
I could not draw like that in elementary school. Did you see the bills raining down, guys? That was awesome.
Plane.
Look at that is an impressive plane. Look at that.
Wow. Some of them are more like, you know, my level of ability. No offense, children. See, that one's even upside down, so I can't even show it correctly.
That's better than I could
That's
do,
more
I
me.
think.
That's more
That's
me
how I would
style.
jump out of a plane,
Also,
though, like head first.
Me style as well. You know, kind of looks like a whale, maybe, or the Loch Ness Monster, possibly. But you see the little guy jumping out? That's pretty good, right?
I don't know. I can't see these because you took all the pictures and wouldn't give me any.
Well, because that's how I roll, Alice.
Do you guys see what he does, by the way? This is like so abusive.
This one's really
That
good.
one
Look
is
at this.
really good. That's a great briefcase
that
full
one's
of
awesome.
cash. And it's accurate, not a backpack, a briefcase.
There you go, briefcase. And here you go. Look at that. This person has a
This
future as a
person
sketch
actually
artist.
needs to draw faces because that face is realistic looking.
All right. Well, for those of you listening on the podcast, sorry you missed out on that, but that's life. If you were to join Patreon and watch these live, you would be able to see that too. That's my one pitch for Patreon. I'll leave it at that.
If it makes you feel better, guys, I have to join Patreon just to see those pictures too, because Brett keeps them from me.
It's true. It's true. It's true. This is why those of you who are going to CrimeCon, if it's not too late to vote for the Creator of the Year award, we need to win another one.
Is there an award this
Operation
year?
Win an award for Alice. If there is, if we didn't retire it, because I mean, really, who else should win it? Then all of you need to vote
those
for
of you who
us
have not
so we can
followed
get
this saga.
Alice a trophy.
No, this is ridiculous, guys. Let me just correct the record for 1 second, because that is a ridiculous grab for votes. I am not grabbing for votes. All I want is my fair share. So last year, you guys surprised the just hats off of us when you voted for us for Creator of the Year award at CrimeCon. 1,000% did not expect to win it. We were so excited to win it that Brett never let me touch it. And to this day, it's a year later, I haven't touched it. I don't know where it is. I mean, I know where it is because I see it behind him every time we record, just taunting me. Is it at my house? It is not. It is at Brett's house. So that's what he's talking about. Look, you don't have to vote for us. Again, because we don't need a second award. You could just break into Brett's house and steal it from me. So I challenge you to that. Vote for us or break into Brett's house and steal it from me.
Sounds like if you want to keep the podcast together, we probably need to win another one, guys. I'm just saying. I didn't expect to win the first one, and I certainly don't expect to win another one.
Oh gosh.
But
anyways,
this may be critical. This may be a critical moment in the podcast.
I hope everyone's
Trying to
having
get
a
Alice on the board.
fantastically spicy tax day. We just thought everyone could use a little spice on tax day anyways.
There you go. There you go. Congratulations. And all those of you who ran the Boston Marathon, congratulations to you as well. Okay, so we are talking about D.B. Cooper for the third episode. And I just got to tell you, I was thinking about this tonight. If I thought D.B. Cooper was still alive, I might become completely obsessed with this case. Probably by now, whether he survived the jump or not, he's probably no longer with us. But man, I mean, this one has really grabbed me in a way I did not expect.
I will say, Brett,
kind of
Brett and I
with it.
researched this case, and we did all the work for this case more than a month ago because we went and spoke with Lidditz Elementary, and he was already pretty obsessed then. But in the interim, in the last month, I don't know what happened, but he has really gone down. And we've done other cases in the interim, but he has really gone down the D.B. Cooper path. And I haven't seen you in a while, and I think that's because you've just been diving into different theories. So, this is your case, man.
I think one of the problems with it is there's no hard facts. We're going to talk about the facts of this case here in a second. Some of the things we're going to say, you're going to be like, that's not true because I heard the other thing. And you know what? Maybe the other thing you heard is true. It's hard to say because this is one of those cases where the legend has become so powerful and so well known that the actual truth is really hard to ascertain.
And unlike the Lighthouse case that we did in the first season where you saw how the lore developed, the lore has developed since day one. I mean, his name became D.B. Cooper during the search. That's how I don't know that the truth exists anymore, to be totally honest. I don't know that the truth is knowable, especially as time has passed and witnesses and anyone who knows anything has died off.
And you would think the FBI would be consistent on this stuff, but they're not, as you're going to see in some of the things we're going to talk about tonight. It is hard to even say what the weather was that night. And you feel like that's something that's pretty solid. In reality, it's not that solid. Where he jumped out. Little things that you think would be really important are hard to say. So, I've probably said enough. So many of you have already turned off your podcast because you're like, are they ever actually going to start talking about the case? I'm just kind of obsessed with this case. I don't know what to tell you. And when I become obsessed, I ramble. So I'm rambling. But we finished the timeline last time. Now we're going to get into all the unusual things about this case. Don't expect that we will get to suspects because the suspects are so great and they all deserve enough
you
time.
could make a
they
movie.
Really all deserve their own episodes.
There have been movies made about specific suspects, but they are each so good. And the fact that they went through and cleared or, was not able to definitively say one of the 1,800 suspects, that's a crazy amount of suspects, by the way. If you handed me a case file, Brett, and you're like, here are the 800 suspects, I'd be like, oh, why? 800 is a lot. And here's the thing. I bet you a movie could be made about all 800 because there's so little known about them. These suspects are suspects for a reason. You know what I mean? They have a story in and of themselves, even if they are not D.B. Cooper.
Okay, so here we go. Let's talk about this. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the statute of limitations in this case. So let's say you're out there, DB, and you're wondering, these prosecutors, they really want to know who I am, and maybe I should let them know. So the question is, can D.B. Cooper be prosecuted for this case today? So most federal statutes of limitations are 5 years. Not all of them, but most of them are. And in fact, the statute of limitations for sky piracy is 5 years. So 5 years after the crime occurred, the statute of limitations would expire at that time, and whoever committed it could no longer be prosecuted. So what the government decided to do was the U.S. attorney for the state of Washington indicted the case on the day the statute of limitations would have expired under what is called a John Doe indictment. This is a pretty rare maneuver. It can be used to essentially extend the statute of limitations. It doesn't really extend it. The statute still would have ran. But if you bring an indictment before the statute runs, then you're good. As long as that indictment doesn't get dismissed for some reason, you can prosecute that case if you ever learn who it is. And so what you do is you charge John Doe. You talk about all the facts of the case, establish that a crime occurred, establish that a single person did it, an identifiable person did it, describe who that person is. The only piece of information you don't know is their identity. So you leave that out. So the government could still prosecute Cooper today if he's ever found. Now, what's interesting, and this is something that all of you out there should listen to, just in case you're somebody who helped him. Anyone who helped him is now immune from prosecution. The statute of limitations has run on that person. That person was not indicted. If they even exist, they could not be indicted today. So if you are out there and you know who D.B. Cooper was, and maybe he's dead, and you don't want to say anything because you're afraid that you'll be prosecuted, you're pretty free and clear. So write that book. Let us know who did it.
5 years just does not seem like a very long statute of limitations in general for any crime. Now, mostly statute of limitations extend beyond 5 years, 10 years. And then that's why some statutes you'll see have something written within it, like statute of limitations may start running from the time in which discovery was reasonable or something like that. So that it's you don't have to have these John Doe indictments. But, there are reasons, I suppose, to not. This one, I would be okay with not having a statute of limitations. I don't know what you think, but if you hijack a planet, just kind of feel like we can prosecute you whenever we find you.
See,
you want people to get off. You want more D.B. Coopers. You have gone down the trail of D.B. Cooper.
No. I've always felt this way. Unless it's murder, it has to be a really serious crime for me to think there shouldn't be a statute of limitation. Particularly if no one gets hurt, I feel like every criminal should have an out. So, I've always thought, for instance, that there's a right of escape. I feel like if you get put in prison, you have a right to try and escape. And so I feel like if you do escape, we should go get you and put you back in, but you shouldn't be able to get charged for that. You shouldn't get any additional time for it. It's our fault. We shouldn't let you go. This is just part of the give and take between the state and the criminal. And I just feel like you should get to try and escape. So
oh my gosh, we need to have a whole different episode on this. Just for the record, I totally disagree with Brett. This is a whole completely different episode on the existential question of the judicial system. Let's just say I disagree with you, but okay, I would just put hijacking an airplane, which carries with it a high risk of doing immense harm, probably death to an entire airplane full of innocent people, as a crime on par with potential murder. But let's not get on.
Running a stop sign's dangerous too. I mean, if you don't actually hurt anybody, I feel like you should get some credit for that. Some tiny little piece of credit.
If you're going to hijack a plane or break out of a prison, Shawshank Redemption, I do not think you get credit for any of it. Just stating for the record. Just stating for the record. Yeah. See, people were with you until you started going against Shawshank Guys,
Redemption.
there is a purpose of the judicial system.
Example.
You're an appellate lawyer. The appellate system.
I know.
Oh
and you should go to prison, but you as a human being have a right to seek freedom. I just feel like you should be able to try.
Under the laws that we've all decided to abide
by.
If you are okay with that, you should not be okay with us convicting anybody. Oh my gosh, this has totally gone off the rails.
Convicting
we
people.
are going to have a legal briefs on this because I didn't not know. Wow, I feel like I don't even know you, Brett. We're going to have to duke this out.
There are plenty of crimes that I think you should go to prison for a very long time for. I still think.
So, do you think the death penalty should be that everyone gets a gun and you get to start running, and if you outrun the bullets, you're free to go?
No, but if they try and execute you and it doesn't work, You're good.
That's kind of the same thing. Okay. Whew, we are here for
Anyway,
DB Cooper.
okay.
You guys wanted a show, you got a show.
Statute of limitations. There you go. That's that statute of limitations, just for the record, whatever you think about them and the right to escape.
Did
It
not know.
is
Can we just
in
talk
effect for
about
DB
how
Cooper.
nerdy we are that this all was spurned by the discussion of a statute of limitations? we are the kids who get stuffed in lockers all day long.
Yeah, I mean, who knew Alice was so hard-headed? I mean, just
I'm not
cruel
gonna lie. I
and
thought we'd be
mean to these
flipped on
poor-
that. My goodness, you
these
appellate lawyer,
poor
you poser.
skyjackers. I mean, he was so nice. He was very polite, and you wanted to put him in prison for forever.
He
That's so
threatened an
sad.
entire airplane full of innocent people. Okay.
was an empty
Let's
threat.
go.
Well, we can talk about that, actually, because I don't think I have this on my list, but that is a question. Did he have a bomb or not? And this is actually a pretty interesting and important question, because if he had a bomb, that would indicate some level of familiarity with explosives and engineering. One of the suspects we're going to talk about later, Barb Dayton, just a spoiler alert, actually had experience with explosives. And this is something people point to when they point to her as a possible suspect. So you can see how that actually matters. If the person actually built a bomb, they needed to know how to do that. This bomb was described as being probably sticks of dynamite with some sort of wiring device, and depending on who you ask, either some sort of trigger or two wires that if you brought them together, it would cause the bomb to explode. And the question is, was it a real bomb or not? Now, people describe the sticks as red, which is sort of typically what you think of when you think of dynamite. If you've ever seen Wile E. Coyote or whatever, you think of dynamite as being red. Dynamite actually, in the 70s at least, maybe it's changed now, isn't typically red. It's actually usually yellow at the time. So that's led many people to believe that these could have been road flares or just pipes, empty pipes, and that essentially you don't need a real bomb because you're just going to show it off. You're going to give a brief look at it. That's going to be enough to get what you want. And by the way, when you jump out of the plane, if it'd been a real bomb, that's adding a new level of difficulty if you're going to hold the bomb all the way down and hope that when you land, for instance, the bomb doesn't go off. So I think there's a pretty good argument that it wasn't a real bomb, which means that some of those other considerations, is he an engineer? Does he know explosives? Might not be as important. And recall, this wasn't present day. You couldn't Google how to build a bomb. If it was a real bomb, you would have to have at least some familiarity with explosives in order to be able to do that. What do you think, Alice? Do you think it was a real bomb? Real bomb? Not real bomb?
I think it didn't need to be a real bomb. I think he knew exactly, this was such a trusting environment. He could walk up with no ID, buy a ticket, get on a plane, even ask things like, is this a 727? And no one even raises an eyebrow. I think it was very well thought out, but he also knew that people were not going to take chances up in the air because it's such a serious crime where there's an entire plane full of innocent people. And this is a very serious crime, Brett, that it didn't have to be a real bomb. And adding a real bomb could set off people, whether it's when you go buy the ingredients, I don't know if that's what it's called, but it could let someone else be alerted to the fact that something's wrong. Because what if he's in the bathroom before he gets on a plane, sets the briefcase down, someone accidentally picks it up, or he drops it, it opens, people see it. I just don't think, well, I guess then if you see it, you still see it. But I don't think he needed that level of difficulty. It accomplished exactly what he needed, which is the power of his words. That's why he brought just a note to the stewardess, right? He didn't need anything more than that. It was a very polite note. Everything was kind of in polite company. So all he needed was simply the threat and not a real bomb.
And I'll just note, Alice, if he had detonated the bomb and killed anyone, there wouldn't have been a statute of limitations because that would have been a far more serious crime.
What if he was just
Okay,
bad at
the
making
tie.
bombs and didn't go off? Okay, sorry.
That's
Guys, we
also
are
a
here for
possibility.
DB Cooper and
Okay.
about his tie because we have talked about his tie a lot. And I really do love this because if you don't have a clip-on tie, maybe we should all get clip-on ties for CrimeCon because this is kind of a thing now.
I haven't seen a clip-on tie in a long time.
Do you
Like,
not
for
shop
little
in the boys
boys
section of Dillard's?
Well, yeah, little boys have clip-on ties, but I don't know. I mean, maybe men still wear clip-on ties. I'm not sure.
Not me, but Mr. Alice has a clip-on bow tie that I make fun of him about because he can never remember how to tie a bow tie. I will wear the clip-on bow tie
Well,
because it's funny.
See, I can't laugh too much on that because I don't know how to tie a bow tie either. I mean, that is true. If it comes to a bow tie, I need it to be pre-tied or I'm going to be in trouble. But Cooper's tie was a clip-on tie, and at the time, that wasn't that unusual. And in sort of that flourish that helps make this case. I just imagine it. He opens the rear doors and the wind is whipping around him, and he steps down the stairs and he's ready to jump, and he takes the tie and he throws it off, and then he leaps into the void like some sort of Robin Hood of the modern age. Well, that's essentially what he did, because of all the things, he didn't leave the bomb behind, real or fake. But what he did leave behind was the tie. And at the time, they didn't get a whole lot out of this. There was no fingerprints on it, obviously. At the time, they didn't really know much about DNA, but they kept the tie. And the tie is something they didn't lose. They lost a bunch of other stuff that would have been really helpful, but they didn't lose the tie, even though at the time it had not much in the way of evidentiary value. They would show it to people and say, do you recognize this tie? The tie was actually a fairly common tie that had been sold at J.C. Penney. Those of you who remember J.C. Penney, but was a few years out of date, which I think is also sort of a hint. It's either a tie that he had purchased some time before, or some people have suggested maybe he just picked up a tie at Goodwill for this particular event, because you're going to get on a plane, you got to dress up, right? Well, the tie in recent years has undergone a lot of examination. For one thing, saliva was found on the tie, and the FBI has been able to develop a DNA profile on the basis of that. I've always wondered if they'll ever try genetic genealogy. If Othrams out there listening, you totally need to get on this.
I'm just curious. So the saliva is what, like 50 years or more old, and it was still enough DNA dried up to like do some sort of profile? Because that's amazing. I haven't heard that before.
I mean, Othram's done 100-year-old cases, so, you know, it's possible.
I guess just
but
something
yeah,
about
they
saliva.
were able to do it.
I mean, I guess blood is also liquid, so there's probably whatever properties preserve it.
Now, it took them a while. Initially, when DNA was first developed, you're absolutely right. They said, there's no way we can do this. But DNA technology has come so far in the last 30 years that at this point, they were able to do it. And they have compared it to a few of the suspects, and so far none have matched. Now, there is one issue, which we always bring up when we talk about DNA, because people want to act like DNA can only be from whoever it is you're looking for. You know, if it doesn't match the suspect, well, he must be innocent. Well, if it doesn't match these people, they must be innocent. We don't know where the DNA came from. The FBI has been pretty upfront with the fact, like, look, it's saliva, so it seems like it's probably connected to the tie a little bit more than just touch DNA, but it could have come from Goodwill. It could have been borrowed. There's any number of ways that DNA could have gotten onto the tie. But I think it's pretty, I mean, I don't know. I feel like it's pretty solid. I certainly would like to know who that DNA belongs to, and I do hope that maybe genetic genealogy can be used at some point. But it's not just that. And in fact, some of the other things found on the tie are even more fascinating. So at some point, the FBI, as we read you last week, decided we can't figure this out. Throwing up our hands. And when they did that, they did something that was pretty interesting. They essentially invited the public, of which there are many dedicated Cooper researchers who you can find on a lot of great websites. They're probably all criticizing us for, you know, missing all sorts of stuff. And that's fine. I get it. Spend your life doing this. Criticize away. But they decided, let's basically open our case file and say, if you people have any thoughts on this, go for it. And one person who was very into this case was a scientist who had an electron microscope, because, you know, just had those laying around. And so he was able to get a hold of the tie from the FBI. They met him at like a diner and gave it to him and run it through the electron microscope. And he found some really interesting things. He found metal spirals and pure titanium. Now, titanium is fairly common and used in a lot of different things, particularly today. But pure titanium was incredibly rare at the time of the hijacking. In fact, almost all private industry at the time used titanium alloy. So it wouldn't have been pure titanium. It'd be mixed with something else. Pure titanium was only used in a few specialized metalworking places and chemical places, and in military research and development. So you can imagine where this has sent people because of pure titanium. So this is a potential clue to who Cooper was. If he was working in a metal shop, or if he was working in some sort of construction industry, building something that uses pure titanium, at the time, the protocol was that only engineers and managers wore suits and ties to work. So that would make you think that Cooper, if he worked in a place where he would have been exposed to this kind of titanium, would have been someone who's working in one of these metal shops. The other possibility is he could have worked at some sort of air manufacturing company. Now, people will tell you that the fact is pure titanium indicates that he did not work in the airline industry because planes at the time were not made of pure titanium. But there were one kind of aircraft that did use pure titanium in some form or fashion in their construction, and that's supersonic planes, military planes and supersonic planes. At the time, Boeing was building the supersonic transport, which was going to compete with the Concorde airline. They were building that. In 1971, they stopped production on that plane. There was an economic downturn. The airline industry was in a lot of trouble. They stopped production of the plane, stopped research on the plane, led to layoffs of thousands of people. Right at the time when you have D.B. Cooper deciding to hijack a plane wearing a tie that has titanium on it. So it makes you think it's possible that he is someone who worked for Boeing on the supersonic transport or in some sort of industry related to the supersonic transport that would have experienced downstream effects from Boeing canceling that program.
And that all sounds like incredible, right? That sounds like an incredible break in what we could know about D.B. Cooper. And it all could mean nothing because of what we said earlier. If this clip-on tie was something he picked up, whether he borrowed it or he bought it from a thrift store, and who knows, maybe then it narrows the thrift store to a region where there are these R&D plants or other sort of, factory that works with pure titanium. But that sounds incredible. And the first time I heard it, I was like, now we can really hone in on who D.B. Cooper is. Except we have no idea what role the tie plays in all of this. But one thing to know, we did say it was a few years out of date. If in fact he had been working at Boeing and he had been laid off, it might make sense that he was hard hit for money, not going to be buying the latest and greatest tie. And so he's been wearing a tie for, however many years, showing up at his job. That all kind of fits. But we'll get into this later when we talk about suspects. That type of a job is certainly not a sole person job. You do not develop military planes and supersonic planes by yourself. You, by design, work with a team of engineers and scientists. And so if you had been part of that, you likely were at least known to other people. If you've been laid off, maybe there's no record of you not showing up to work after this jump and you disappeared for all time. And so no one knew to report you. But it also indicates that you worked in an environment where people were very close to you, like physically close to you, knew you. You probably were not a loner. There were at least social ties to other people because you worked in a facility with other people. And yet we've never heard of anyone who was able to place a missing person, for example, who may have had knowledge about a Boeing 727, may have been able to place something like this. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Not everyone watches the news. Not everyone's thinking about, Bob down the street who they haven't heard from in a while, who could be D.B. Cooper. But these things, if we're building a profile of who we think D.B. Cooper is, it's helpful to know what kind of environment he came from and what that environment may or may not tell us about the people who may have been able to report something gone awry, someone gone missing, someone not reporting to work anymore, someone no longer answering phone calls to get together for a beer.
Get this, adults with financial literacy skills have 82% more wealth than those who don't. From swimming lessons to piano classes, us parents invest in so many things to enrich our kids' lives. But are we investing in their future financial success? With Greenlight, you can teach your kids financial literacy skills like earning, saving, and investing. And this investment costs less than that after-school treat. Start prioritizing their financial education and future today with a risk-free trial at greenlight.com/Wondery. Greenlight.com/Wondery.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
This is a mini meditation guided by Bombas. Repeat after me. I'm comfy, comfy. I'm cozy, cozy. I have 0 blisters on my toes. Blisters. And that's because I wear Bombas, the softest socks, underwear, and T-shirts that give back. One purchased equals one donated. Now go to bombas.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY at checkout.
So, we're just getting started. There are other unusual aspects of the way D.B. Cooper communicated. Do you remember when he asked for money? He didn't ask just for money. He asked specifically for innegotiable American currency. Now, this request for money was made in a strange way. This led some to believe that Cooper was not actually an American when he asked for negotiable American currency. And some suspect he may have actually been French Canadian. But why French Canadian? Well, that brings us to the money. All 10,000 bills had their numbers recorded by something called a recordac machine, which took pictures of the serials on microfilm. This was not done the night of the hijacking, as we've previously mentioned, because banks actually kept ransom money, like in their vaults, specifically for this event. If they were going to need ransom money for any specific reason, there's usually going to be a time limit around it. So they don't have time to take all these microfilm pictures of all these serial numbers, nor do they have time to record it by hand. So what they do is they pre-record numbers of these bills, and these bills are like in a special ransom bag and only used if they have a ransom event like the D.B. Cooper hijacking. But although these numbers of the 10,000 bills were recorded, it's unlikely that this did really any good in terms of tracking the bills, because they had to still be checked by hand. So you had the microfilm of the serial number, but there wasn't a corresponding electronic way to see if a bill that came into your shop or to the bank matched one of those 10,000 microfilms. Rather, you had the microfilms and had to check by hand if the bill in front of you matched one of the 10,000. So at best, banks in this area checked numbers for maybe 6 months or so. But if you've ever been to a bank, you know a lot of bills change hands. It's busy. Whether a banker wants to stay late at night to check the bills for one of 10,000 microfilms that it might be, it's as good as the person who's checking it. And also, you're going to be limited really in region, right? I think it would be kind of hard to explain the importance to, say, a Florida or a Georgia bank that is thousands of miles away from where this jump happened, to say it's important for them to check these 10,000 bills when they probably have their own ransom issues, maybe a bank robbery, maybe other things that they're supposed to be checking on. And that's the other thing to remember. A lot of hijackings at this time. Also, just everyone kind of has their own legal issues, right? So maybe they have their own microfilms of pre-recorded serial numbers that they were already checking, and it makes more sense to stay within your region. So even to think about how much work this would take for someone to check these serial numbers by hand, a dedicated crew to check all 26 pages of numbers, and that's how many pages it was when you wrote them all down. These numbers weren't even sequential. So there was no control F function where you could look for the number. It wasn't like, okay, these are all number L000001. The next one is L00002, L003, all the way to L00010,000. That would have been simple, but that's not the way they were recorded. So you see how practically it was really difficult to track these serial numbers, and the fact that none of these 10,000 bills have, quote, shown up in circulation doesn't mean they didn't show up in circulation. It just means they were never captured by anyone who was checking.
And what would make it even harder is if you just walked across the Canadian border, because remember, this is Washington. So you have your 10,000 bills, and you could just put that in a briefcase and get on a plane because nobody checks anything. There's no security. Like, it wouldn't be hard at all to do this, or fly to Great Britain or whatever. And then just slowly change out your American currency, your negotiable American currency, into Canadian loonies or British pounds or whatever. And you talk about a good way to launder some money. And by the way, we did not have that great a relationship with the Canadians at the time. This was a sort of not a great time for American-Canadian relations. So if you were Canadian and you did this and you took this money and you went to Canada, probably the Canadians weren't that interested in helping investigate this case. And I doubt Canadian banks were spending a lot of time checking the serial numbers on these bills. And I think, honestly, if he'd gone to Florida, they wouldn't have been that interested in it. Like, people act like, well, they had the numbers. They were checking the numbers. Okay, maybe.
Can I tell you one thing that I was really surprised about when I first became a prosecutor? The number of bank robberies that happen to this day. I mean, I can only imagine they happened more often back then when it was like, you know, I guess the justice system was more like Brett's world, where it's like, if you escape, you get to get away with it. But like, were you surprised by this, Brett? I was like, I would do the intake and I'd be like, say what? There were 6 bank robberies over the weekend? We live in a very small town. What are you talking about? Where were the security cameras? What do you mean they got away with it? They took the whole ATM? Who does that?
Let me just say, the money to prison sentence between bank robbing, really bad. If you rob a bank, you're going to prison for a long time. If you steal $1 million from Medicaid, you probably just get away with it. But if you take $5,000 from a bank, you're going to prison for 20 years. So,
and if you use a gun, even worse. You probably don't need to use a gun to manipulate some online fraud for Medicare fraud.
Not saying you should commit fraud, but
you shouldn't. Just saying there's a disparity.
You shouldn't.
Which is why also I was so shocked, because it's not like we're very lenient on bank robbers. And so the fact that there were so many, I remember one weekend I came in, after a weekend I came in on a Monday, and I just had this stack of cases on my desk, and they were all bank robberies that happened over the weekend in the area. And I was like, what? Am I missing something? Did I not get the memo that this is what we're all supposed to be doing to show our masculinity is rob a bank?
And they always get caught. You're not going to make it 5 years if you rob a bank. They're going to find you in 5 minutes.
Yeah, so, banks are not the greatest to rob. But, get a VPN and do some online
Bad
fraud.
Idea.
That's a lot harder to trace. Okay, don't do that, though. We are not for that. That's the kind of crimes that I really try to go after, because those are not victimless crimes. Anyways, there are other reasons why people suspected maybe D.B. Cooper wasn't American at all, maybe French-Canadian. And why is that? Not just because of his term, negotiable American currency. Have you ever heard of the incredible Dan Cooper? And if you have...
Why, no, Alice, I haven't.
And if you have, then I want to talk to you, because this was a very popular Franco-Belgian comic written in French only at the time of the hijacking, and it was titled The Incredible Dan Cooper. And it followed the amazing adventures of Dan Cooper, who was an elite Royal Canadian Special Forces operative who often did things like fly and jump out of planes, including commercial aircraft. Here's the funny thing about The Incredible Dan Cooper. Sounds like a story that sounds very familiar, doesn't it? It was never translated into English. So if you were aware of The Incredible Dan Cooper and his very similar antics as what we saw D.B. Cooper did, you likely read it in French, not in English. That's really interesting. We know of a lot of people who carry out kind of these fantastic episodes of crime after fictional characters. You see this all the time on TV. When you check into a hotel under a pseudonym, it's usually a Disney princess or some sort of character that you want to emulate who is fictional. I mean, I've never read this because, again, I don't read French and I didn't read this comic. But if you're aware of this comic, I'd really love to hear about just how close of these jumping out of airplanes The Incredible Dan Cooper did aligns with the story we now know today as D.B. Cooper.
Yeah, and it's the same artist who created Tintin. So, a pretty famous illustrator, but not someone that would have been well known in the United States. And you think, where did this name come from? Not D.B. Cooper, which is awesome, but the slightly less exciting Dan Cooper. Now, look, maybe he just looked it up in the phone book and came across a Dan Cooper, and that was that. But I think most people don't think that's what happened. I mean, the FBI basically found every Dan Cooper in America. So it would have given them some sort of lead if there's a Dan Cooper in the phone book, and that means maybe the guy's from there. But this is very specific and seems very similar to what we're looking at here.
And here's the beautiful thing. Okay, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see a picture of the French comic cover of one of these, and it says Dan Cooper. The rest of it's in French. I don't know what it says. But it is a picture of a man in like a parachute onesie with a front pack and a backpack, goggles, and like a gas mask on, jumping out of a plane looking bad A. Right? Like he's just jumping out, and it's clear that he's parachuting down because he's holding on to, I assume, like the handles of a parachute. I mean, this is how I imagine D.B. Cooper jumped out of the Boeing 727.
And some of the suspects were supposedly comic book enthusiasts who maybe would have collected this comic even though it was never translated in English. The other possibility, which I find fascinating, is someone who served overseas in the military. Remember, this is somebody who was jumping out of planes. We're going to talk about whether or not we think they actually had training or not. Some of them do, some of them don't. But let's say you served in Vietnam. Maybe if you served in Vietnam, you were more likely to see a Franco-Belgian comic, since Vietnam was a French colony at some point. I mean, these are all things that are possibilities for what happened and what inspired the name Dan Cooper, because that is a clue. It's obviously not his name. I don't think he used his real name, first or last. So could he have just pulled that out of the air? Possible. Is it likely he just happened to pull the name out of the air of a guy who does exactly the same things? I guess that's possible, but it seems at least a little unlikely. Okay, so we're talking about the money sum. The other question that comes up is, did he ask for 20s? When this story was initially told, it was often told as he asked for $200,000 in $20 bills. That seems not to be accurate. In fact, most of the sort of FBI people now, the sort of re-interviewing with the witnesses, particularly the flight attendants, have indicated that he probably didn't do that. Now, it seems initially that he probably did, because if it were up to the police, you'd think they'd give him hundreds, because it would be much easier to track $100 bills than 10,000 20s. When somebody breaks 100, that is something, it's a little easier than 20s, which people literally use all the time, even in 1971. He bought the airline ticket with a 20, he bought the drink with a 20, and that was before he'd stolen any money. So I guess that the money they had in that vault, they just had 20s. And so that's what they decided to go with, was 20s instead of 100s. Obviously, hindsight's 2020. He probably would have wanted to ask for hundreds, but he didn't do that. Now, one thing he did ask for was a backpack to carry the money. He wanted something with straps. I don't think he actually called it a backpack. I think he called it a knapsack. But that's not what he got. He got a bank bag. He got basically just a canvas bag filled with 10,000 20s. And I think $2,000 a bundle, basically. And that's what he had. And so if he was going to take that out of the plane, he was going to have to tie it to himself with a spare parachute cord, which we know that Tina Mucklow, the last thing she saw was him opening up a parachute, opening up one of the spares, and cutting the lines with a knife. And the indication is that he used that to tie up the bag and then tie the bag to himself. This would not have been a big deal for an experienced parachutist. People in the military who've been trained in this, when you jump out of a plane, you're often jumping out with a lot of weight, more than what he was jumping out with, and there are ways to do it. And in fact, oftentimes you can tie something around your waist, you jump out of the plane, and then you just let it hang, and it's the first thing that hits the ground, and then you hit immediately after it. That's probably what he did, or at least what he tried to do.
I was just thinking if like they went the other way and gave him like a bunch of ones, so it was like too much to carry, but then that would probably make him angry, and they had innocent people on board that they were trying not to, endanger further.
Okay, let's talk about the weather. This is really important. How bad was the weather? Now, it wasn't great. He wasn't jumping out on a sunny afternoon with blue skies and no wind. It's often said that the weather was basically unsurvivable, that if he jumped out of the plane this time, only a madman would even do it. The weather was terrible. It was so cold. He was wearing a suit There was cloud cover at 5,000 feet. He wouldn't be able to see anything. He was just jumping into the darkness with no visibility whatsoever. Actually, there's a lot of controversy about this, and people who've looked into this a little bit closer and have talked to some of the FBI people who were involved in this have said that actually it's not so clear that when he jumped that the weather was as bad as people think it was. Now, it's been reported, as I said, that at 5,000 feet, there was cloud cover that was thick, impenetrable. You couldn't see through it, which would have made it impossible to see. Remember, they were at 10,000 feet when he jumped. But it seems like the 15 minutes he waited. Remember, the stairs go down, and he's waiting for up to 15 minutes before he jumps, doing something. Unclear what he's doing. Maybe he's standing on the edge of the stairs, terrified, or maybe he's waiting. And as we said earlier, the FBI got it wrong initially on exactly where the plane was when he jumped. It was actually much further south and a little bit to the west when he jumped. That's where it actually was. There are some things that are important about that. Number one, the clouds were breaking in that area at the time. He probably actually could see. Remember, when they were flying up, he was actually looking out the window, pointing out cities that he was seeing. So he could see things at some point on the flight, and it's likely that by this point he could see things as well. And that would have included things like lights, which would have indicated to him where he was and possibly what he was looking for. If he was someone who was familiar with the flight routes in this area, he would have been familiar with the landmarks as well. So it could be that he's standing on the edge of those stairs, looking out into the darkness, waiting to see something to signal to him, this is the place to go. And if that's true, he may have had a much better idea of where he was going to come down than people have thought. As I said, the original search location was based on a mistake by the FBI. And that area is incredibly dense. It's wilderness. There are so many trees, it's hard to imagine anyone surviving the jump. There were a lot of people who thought they were going to find a dead D.B. Cooper with his parachute stuck in the trees and $200,000 at his feet. That's what a lot of people thought they were going to find. They didn't find that. And it is hard to imagine someone surviving that jump. But if the recent analysis is true, and him waiting that long meant he was jumping much further south, closer to the Columbia and the Washougal River, then he would have been jumping over much more open territory, the kind of places that you could survive, not up near Lake Merwin Dam, if you're familiar with the area, which it would have been hard to survive. And a lot of the FBI folks who've looked at this actually think, at the end of the day, the jump was much more survivable than they initially thought.
And here's another thing, so the weather thing I think is very interesting because whatever the weather was, we also know that there's differences in where you are in terms of height and what the weather system is like. But even if he couldn't see, I think especially if we are thinking this is someone who had military training or had experience in parachuting. This probably wasn't his first time parachuting. Whether he was an expert or not, maybe another question. But those who have at least military training have ways of telling where they are even when visibility is low, whether that is with compasses, coordinates, star location. I don't know if he's able to see stars above him, if the cloud, cover is below him. So I think even if there was cloud cover and he couldn't see directly below him, he probably, if he had that expertise and that training, had other ways of knowing where to jump with the greatest probability of success. And you'd have to think that if he thought out all of this, all the way to here with his potentially fake bomb, all the way to the $200,000, he would have thought of how to land successfully, right? Because none of this matters if he doesn't survive the jump. And I don't have enough military training to know how to know those sorts of things. But without knowing more about him, I don't know that we are able to definitively say whether he has the knowledge to do so or not. But again, because he has planned out everything else, this is the specific action that everything relies on. Being dead in a tree with a parachute and money hanging by your feet, not that great. Why do that? So I do think that there were probably contingency plans, even if it was going to be a stormy night and he couldn't see and it wasn't left up to pure break in the clouds to be able to see where he was going to jump. Let's talk about the finding of the little bit of money that was recovered, because we talked about those bills, the 10,000 bills that were recorded by microfilm and how none of them were found in circulation. It's true, none of the money was found in circulation, but some of the money was found. Remember, the official story is that Brian Ingram, who was on a picnic with his family, found $5,000 at Tina Bar after he was clearing a space for a fire for this picnic, and he kind of moved, some mud around and uncovered the money. Now, this money that he found, they was still wrapped in rubber bands in bundles, and each of these bundles had the same amount of money in it, except 10 of the 20s were missing from one of the bundles. Now, why this is interesting is when you have full bundles found, you can imagine they fell out of the bag when DB Cooper was jumping, or, this is only $5,000, not all $200,000. So maybe some of it fell over the side while he was jumping. You can imagine that. And so he never touched it. These bundles were intact when they fell until they were recovered by Brian Ingram many years later. But the fact that 10 bills were missing from a bundle that was still intact, if you can imagine how rolls of money are, it's hard to pull out one bill without disturbing the entire bundle, right? Like think of toilet paper, I guess, the way it's spiraled. If you pull a middle piece as opposed to the outside piece, it kind of pulls out the entire spiral, so the bundle is no longer intact. And so you can imagine this has led some people to believe that was that bundle actually unbanded, 10 bills taken out, re-rolled, banded again, and that was what was found. And if that's what happened, was DB Cooper alive and he had actually been using this money, and somehow he lost this not during the jump, but perhaps later on after he'd already been successfully on the ground, was using the money, and somehow this just fell out of his pocket or something like that. And again, it's because it's only a small fraction of the money that he jumped with. We didn't find the rest of that money. That wasn't found in that area, which you might expect if the entire bag had fallen when he jumped.
Yeah. And, the finding of the money, and we talked about this a little bit last time, the finding the money in some ways is as mysterious as DB Cooper himself. The money was, they could tell that these bills didn't just float away, for instance, because the way the money was, it was obvious that the bills, once they were in the water, had stayed together because there was bleed through of the serial numbers going all the way through the bills, which indicated the serial numbers had not moved. So the money stayed together. So these 10 bills, if they were removed, it seems like they would have been removed some other time. Now, maybe he removed them on the plane. Maybe Tina Mucklow did take some of that money. And when she said, when he offered her the tip and she said no, maybe in reality she said yes. I don't know. Or maybe he spent the 20s. But how this money ended up there is, it's weird. And it's even weirder if you think the FBI got the original drop zone correct, because this wasn't that close at all to where that original drop zone was. Now, there's also just the finding of the money itself is going to become part of one of the suspect stories we're going to talk about, because there are people who think this wasn't an accident, that in fact, the money was found intentionally, planted there by DB Cooper or an accomplice for this family to find, to make it seem like he had drowned. Remember, this is found on the water. It's found off the Washougal water, a river, and I think the Washougal, the Columbia, they all run together. And so you think, okay, well, he jumped in the water, he died, and somehow this money ended up there. We're going to talk about some more things about the money in a second that are going to make it seem even stranger and even more inexplicable that this money ended up where it did. But we'll pause for a second so Alice can talk about The Grudge.
All right. But I really do love when you talk about the money, so we'll go back there. Okay, yes, The Grudge. And we're not talking about the scary movie. Remember when Tina Mucklow, she is, I kind of like that she's having conversation with DB Cooper. I think I'd be too scared. But she asked Cooper why he was picking on the Northwest Orient. What did he have against this airline? Like, she worked for the airline. Why bring this upon them? And Cooper told her that he didn't have a grudge against the airline, but he did have a grudge. What a mic drop, by the way. Like, you're not going to tell us? Really? You're about to jump out of a plane? You're not going to tell me who you have a grudge against? And this is really interesting because we've talked a lot about the profile of who DB Cooper is, but like a burning eternal question is, why do this? Right? I mean, sure, $200,000 is a lot of money, but this is quite elaborate. I mean, your whole life is about to either end or change. So is it just money that he's doing it? It doesn't seem like it, not based on this conversation with Mucklow. So what was the grudge? What did it have to do with this plane or the pilot or whatever? If it's not the airline, what are the things he could be having a grudge about? And how does hijacking this plane, if it's not the airline he has a grudge against, help him with the grudge?
Maybe he has a grudge against Boeing. Remember, what have we talked about up to this point? We've talked about titanium. We talked about the titanium supersonic plane that Boeing had just stopped and thousands of people had lost their jobs because of it. And he's jumping out of a Boeing plane that he seems to have some familiarity with. You know, it's speculative, of course, but you start tying these things together and they get pretty interesting, and they're more interesting than the DNA because the DNA is just there. You know, the DNA doesn't tell you anything except who it is, which would be a big deal if it's their DNA. But the other stuff on the tie tells you more of a story. It gives you more potential background about the person you're looking for. And when you start tying all this together, it starts to fit. And these are all things to remember. As we've said, as we've gone through this, we've sort of pointed to evidence, some evidence that you can think about. And next week, we're going to get to suspects in this case. And we're going to talk about those people. We're going to talk about their lives. We're going to talk about what they did and where they were from. Some of those people line up pretty well with this sort of Boeing theory. One person in particular who is my personal favorite suspect. We'll talk about next week. Before we get to that, there is more. So we just mentioned the money. Okay. So they find this money. They find it in the sand, buried in the sand on the river in 1980. Obviously, DB Cooper landed in the water and the money washed up, and it's been there just waiting for somebody to find. It's got problems with that. Number one, money would not survive that long in the wilderness unless something unusual happened. And there are some unusual properties. If it was in the right layer of sand, that sand is actually pretty sterile, and so maybe it would protect the money. The money wasn't in great shape. You know, you would notice that something had happened to this money. It had deteriorated some, but it was still in good enough shape. For instance, you could read the serial number, which they then used to confirm that this was some of DB Cooper's money. But it's not just that. So remember, what did the FBI do? They let people take a look at this. And when you know it, the same people who found the titanium took a look at the money. Now, one thing they found was silver, and they kind of went crazy with silver. They were like, there's traces of silver on this, and that became a big deal. But then someone reminded them, problem is the FBI dusted for fingerprints with silver nitrate back in the 70s. So they were able to say, oh, okay, that's where the silver comes from. When they dusted this for fingerprints, that's where it came from, not from something about the water that would tell you something. But there was something they did find. Diatoms, I think is how they're pronounced. Diatoms. But I'm going to go with diatoms because I think that sounds
I like diatoms.
better. So they found diatoms on the money. I'm going with Alice's pronunciation. And that revealed something interesting. Now, diatoms are plankton. It's a species of plankton that lives in the water where the money was found. So you're probably saying, of course they found diatoms on the money. The money's been in the water. Duh. But there are multiple species. And some species do things like attach themselves to money in the spring. And some of them attach themselves to money in the winter. This was a spring species. They would not have appeared on the money if it was deposited there in November. Now, maybe you're thinking, okay, fine. It went in there in November, and I guess the winter species just missed it for some reason. But then the spring species came along, and they went ahead and attached themselves. And, you know, there's just been this weird, the winter species doesn't like the money for some reason. Well, the problem was there was only one season of the plankton, which meant the money appears to have only been in the water for a short period of time before it was found in 1980, likely deposited sometime in 1979. This is supported by the diatoms and by the state of the money, which is much more like money that's been there for a little while, a year tops, but not the 9 years it would have needed to be there if it ended up in the water in 1971. Now, you can imagine some weird circumstances in which maybe somehow it like got hung up in the tree and then there was a big storm and it fell in the water or something. But it basically would have to be something like that. But there's another problem. The money was found in the top layer of the sand. In fact, it was so easy to find that when this 8-year-old boy gets down on his hands and knees to clear a spot for them to make a fire, that he immediately uncovers the money. It's under like barely any sand at all. Well, that was above a dredge layer. So that river had been dredged at that area. So the little machine comes down the river, it digs up the bottom of the river, and it spits it out on the shoreline. So you had a dredge layer. That dredging occurred years after the hijacking occurred, which means if the money had been in the sand in 1971, it would have been covered up by the dredge layer. It would not have been on top of it. It had to have come from somewhere later on, and where it came from is really difficult to figure out.
This is all fascinating. I mean, it really is, because I think my first question to you when I heard about the money being found 9 years later was, does money survive that long? So the fact that this money was found at all is pretty amazing if it had been there for 9 years, which Occam's razor probably was there. It probably was not dropped by someone in 1980, but it really just creates more questions than anything.
It really does. It really does. And the other problem, there have been theories about it sort of being washed down the river to where it ended up, but they've tested the river. I mean, people have actually taken money, bundles of money, and dropped them in the river farther upstream to see whether or not the money would float. And it doesn't. So it would have had to have been a very, and look, it's there. So there's some argument to, yeah, it would have had to have been lucky. Everything would have had to come together, but it did. And that's why it's there. And that's why they found it. But it certainly makes you wonder and opens the door to possible sort of these more extreme conspiracy theories about exactly what happened in this case and what D.B. Cooper was doing in the years after.
Right. And the big thing is, look, after they found this, they definitely did additional searches to see if they could find anything else. And they only found this 5,000. So again, that's just a small, like, why that amount? How did it fall? If it did fall out in the air, you would think it would have scattered more so than those 5,000 being found together. I mean, just so many questions. And the fact that it was found at all, we've talked about this in missing person cases, that because terrains are so difficult and wildlife and weather wears away at a decomposing body, that finding a missing person who has been dead for some time is really like a miracle every time it happens. That's kind of like this in this case, too. I can't believe this $5,000 was found, ever. We could have easily never have known any of the money anywhere. But having it be found, I think, really continues to just add question marks for me.
And look, it's really easy to find a graphic. I'm showing it right now on the YouTube channel, but it's really easy to find a graphic that shows the flight path, where the FBI initially thought D.B. Cooper jumped, and also where the plane went after that. And what's weird about it is, no matter where he jumped, it doesn't seem like the money should have ended up where it did. If he jumped where they thought he jumped, if he jumped later, the money is just way off from where it should be. You would really have to think, you'd have to believe that he actually jumped out a little bit earlier than the FBI thought. He landed way up the river in sort of an offshoot of the river that then runs into the river, the Columbia River, and the money made it all the way down there. I mean, it's pretty hard to figure out how this money ended up where it did, because we're talking 30 miles from the flight path. Not even like, well, he dropped it as he was jumping out and it got carried in the wind. No, the wind would not have carried it as far as where it ended up. It's tough to figure out. It's one of those things where it almost makes you think it was planted, because it's hard to figure out how else it got there. It's almost like a mistake that if somebody planted it to make you think D.B. Cooper died, initially you might have thought that. But the more you thought about it, the more you'd be like, no, this actually doesn't make any sense. Now, maybe it did end up there naturally, but it's just hard to figure out how it would have happened.
So we've talked a lot about many very head-scratching and interesting facets of this case. So we'll leave you on a slightly lighter note. You don't have to head scratch about this. This is just going to be on your bucket list, I hope, one day, now that maybe we'll all have a meetup there. Because here's a fun fact. The Ariel Store and Tavern, which is a bar in Ariel, Washington, throws a party commemorating D.B. Cooper's hijacking every year. What a criminal, right? Like, you get this yearly party thrown for you, and it's called none other than the Cooper Party. Now, this town is awesome because they only have 50 residents, but this is the place where it's thought by some to be the place where Cooper landed, and I appreciate that these 50 residents have just grasped onto it and been like, you know what? Cooper did land here, and we're going to celebrate it every year. And it's a big party. It's one for the ages. The party includes fireworks, raffles for Cooper memorabilia. It's not a lot of it, but, you could manufacture anything you want these days. And even a Cooper look-alike contest. And you know what? I'd like to think if Cooper made it out of that plane alive, he went to that look-alike contest every year and probably didn't win.
And there are some of the suspects who claim they did. So, it is pretty interesting. If you're out there listening in Ariel, invite us. We'll do a live show at the Cooper party.
Sounds like a great party.
I'm totally in now. I'm totally in. I'm totally into this whole Cooper thing.
We're totally in. And maybe you have to pay for everything in 20s.
There you go. There you go. Okay, Alice, you told me not to promise that we'd finish by the end of the day, and I didn't, and I'm glad I didn't, because although we have gotten through these facts, we still have all these amazing suspects to discuss. We've got some ex-military people. We've got some women. Well, we got one woman. We've got some people who admitted to doing this. Several people who admitted to being D.B. Cooper. Presumably they can't all be D.B. Cooper, though. If you listen to some people, maybe they can. And we've got some theories that are kind of out there. Things that you're going to enjoy, and who knows, in this case, anything could be true. So we're going to talk about those next week. And I'm kind of sad because next week will be the end of this story. And I've just really enjoyed this. Maybe I'll just start a DB Cooper podcast. You just want to do a DB Cooper podcast? Let's just DB Cooper all the time.
I was going to say, I don't think it's over after next week's episode because this case has not closed in decades. And unlike the FBI, we will not close this case.
No, we will not. Never. So yeah, we're going to talk about suspects next week. I'm interested to hear if Alice has developed a suspect of her own. I have my favorite suspect that I'm going with. So, Alice, you're going to have to come up with somebody.
All right. I have a favorite. I don't think it's them. I just want it to be them.
I will say this. The person that I think it is, I want it to be. So, I don't know. I don't know if it's them either, but I want it to be this person. So, I'm going with that. Okay, Alice. Well, do you want to do a question before we sign off today?
So nice to do a case that's not murder and mayhem.
I know. So much fun. This is from Aunt McGurker. They want to know, if you hadn't completed law school earlier in life, do you think you'd be able to do it at this stage in life? Everything else the same, full-time job, young kids, etc. Have you worked with many lawyers that have gone to law school later in life and made it their second career? If so, any positives or negatives you've noticed in these types of lawyers? And I will say, we get this a lot. There are a lot of people who listen to the podcast who have thought about going back to law school. And often they are folks who are a little bit further along in life. I will say two things, and then I'll turn it over to Alice. Number one, it is never too late to do it. Could we do a job, the kids, the podcast, and law school? Probably not. We probably would have to sacrifice the podcast, I would think, would be what would have to go. Because it is time consuming, it takes a lot of time, and it's going to take a lot of your time. The thing I'll say about people who did it older in life, they tended to treat it less like school and more like a job. And so they were very regimented in how they did it. They were very committed. They worked really hard to go to class, to do the work they needed to do for the next day, get it all wrapped up, and then transition into their family life and everything else. So you can do it. And I've told this story before. One of the people in my class was a doctor who lost his medical license because he couldn't stay off the cocaine. And he became a lawyer. So you too can be a lawyer, no matter what's happened to you in your previous life, because anybody can get a license from the bar.
I will say the economics change. So going to law school is expensive. And unlike a lot of graduate programs, especially PhD programs, which come funded because typically there's going to be government grants or something for it, law schools typically don't come with a lot of scholarships or grants because people just expect that lawyers will be able to have an income to pay back, have an ROI on law school. And when you're younger, you just have more years for that ROI to pay off. Because a lot of people, whether this is the right way to think or not, think, okay, I'll work for 10 years at a law firm, pay off my law school debt, then go do my dream job. Just by the way, that's not what I did. Think very seriously about your career choices if that's your plan. 10 years is a very long time, especially when they are like the prime years of everything, right? Your youth, your health, your career, your potentially childbearing years, if that's what you want to do. So that's kind of a side note of thinking about whether you want to have like that long of a runway before you can do your real quote unquote job. I've just heard so many people say that I think it's worth repeating. So if I were going to go to law school later in life as a second career, I think it would have to be very specific. So when I went to law school, don't do what I did. I had no plan in my life. I didn't know if I was going to practice law. I kind of went to law school because I was like, sounds like that would be fun, but I don't really know what I want to do with law. That is not a great life plan. That is not a great way to spend a lot of money to go get a graduate degree. But if I were in, say, my stage of life right now, and I had been doing another job, and I was like, you know what? I will not be fulfilled unless I get to be a prosecutor because, you know, this is what my life has led to. And I cannot be a prosecutor without a law degree. So I will go to law school with the explicit reason of becoming a prosecutor. Then I could see myself kind of getting all the money and the energy and the sacrifice to my family and the podcast and friends to be able to go to law school. But I don't think I would simply say, sounds fun, I might do it because I have nothing else to do. So different economic factors and also different goals of going to law school, I think, if it were later in life.
So this next one, I think is kind of humorous. This is from Kristen. She wants to know, what do you both do to unwind?
This podcast. Not a joke. Yeah. Not a joke at all.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of time left of the day. I mean, I'll say this. When we do the podcast, I can't go to sleep immediately, even though, you know, it's usually around 10 or whatever, and I got to go to work tomorrow. So I usually do something. I mean, sometimes I'll play Skyrim. I mean, that's a great game. Or watch like an episode of Only Murders in the Building or something like that. But I don't have a hobby. I'm not a blacksmith in my secret life. I don't go play golf every weekend or anything like that. I just hang out with the kids, go to work, do the podcast, do it all over again.
During like awake hours, I guess this is my hobby. I really like, and Brett makes fun of me about this, I really do like doing activities with my kids. Like, we don't sit around the house, so we like go find things to do, whether it's like strawberry picking, or which Brett makes fun of me about because he's like, why pick them yourself when the store picks them for you, or like go to the baseball game with my kids, things like that. But like when they're asleep, which is far too few hours in a day, honestly, it's this podcast, and this is really sad. I also am amped after recording, and I usually go back to work. And then I go to bed. But I read, you know, that sort of thing.
I just don't know how you have the energy. And I mean, the thing about strawberry picking, they make you pay.
They do
to go
make
harvest
you pay.
The strawberries.
It's true.
For them.
I didn't say it was a smart thing to do.
I should get a discount. I should get paid.
It is funny that it's not any cheaper.
I know, that's the thing.
I like experiences, I should say. Like, you know, there are people who like gifts, experiences. I like experiences. I like people doing things with me, and strawberry picking is one of those things.
And it's a great thing. And I'm glad you enjoy it.
Oh my goodness.
Okay. Well, that's all we have for today. But next time we're going to be back with our last episode on DB Cooper. Encourage you guys to write in. We'd love to hear your theories and thoughts on this case. If there's any little pieces of evidence that we haven't mentioned that you're familiar with that you think is significant, we want to hear about it. The gallery is a Twitter, ironically, with discussion of DB Cooper. So join the gallery. If you're on Facebook, join the gallery. You'll have a lot of fun. I promise you. It's a great group of people. We have a lot of fun on there. We talk about all these cases and other cases and cases that we don't even do episodes on. You can talk about it all in the gallery. So join there. Follow us on social media at ProsecutorsPod for all your social media, including now TikTok, where we do some videos, throw some videos on there. every now and then, or shoot us an email at prosecutorspod@gmail.com. If you want to contact us directly, go to the website, prosecutorspodcast.com, where we put up a lot of documents and research and everything else from the cases. And finally, we'll leave a 5-star review, and we will answer a question for you if you include the question and you leave a 5-star review. We got a lot of questions we're working through, but we are getting through them, and I promise you, if you ask a question, we will get to it eventually. Just be patient. Well, Alice, do you have anything else you want to add before we sign off?
No, but I'm really excited to hear your theories, because I will say, I don't think I've seen you light up about another case the way you do about D.B. Cooper. So this is your case, man.
I do love me some D.B. Cooper. I hope he's running free somewhere in his right of escape, which every human being is born with. So that's what I'm going to hope for. Okay, well, we'll be back next week to talk about suspects. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors.
It is the middle of April. Happy Tax Day, everybody. How is that possible? Where did
it's crazy.
the year go? Where did this month go?
I don't know.
I was saying something like,
where does life go?
I was talking about like a deadline to some folks at work, and I was like, well, we'll be able to do it this month. And I was like, I'm sorry, this week. And they were like, well, this week is basically this month. And I was like, oh my goodness.
We're coming in on 4 years
I know.
of this podcast.
That's crazy.
4 years.
It's like actually crazy.
Yeah.
I don't know about that, man. That is bananas. BANANAS.
Bananas.
Okay.
Banana.
Don't say we're gonna wrap up DB Cooper today, because I don't see that happening.
We're not wrapping up.
Okay, good. Because I was like, there's no way we're gonna wrap it up today.
Because the suspects section just keeps getting longer.
Well, here's the thing: it's not solved, so we might as well go through all the suspects, because maybe we'll solve it.
PlutoTV has over 300 channels and thousands of TV shows and movies for whatever mood you're in. Just open the app and something good will already be playing, because it's curated by people who love TV as much as you do. So if you're in the mood for comedy, there's 18 channels that'll make you laugh. Looking for drama? We got so much of it, you'll cry tears of joy. Reality shows, game shows, sports, Star Trek, and even more Star Trek. No matter what mood you're in, there's something on PlutoTV. Just download the app and start streaming. PlutoTV. Stream now, pay never.
Are you feeling stuck in your career or lacking employment at the moment? Experiencing symptoms of job dissatisfaction? You might be suffering from a common condition known as career stagnation. But don't worry, there's a solution. Monster.com. Monster.com offers a comprehensive suite of career-boosting tools designed just for you. Our free resume review and AI interview prep tool will help you stand out from the crowd. Need more guidance? Dive into our career advice articles for expert tips and insights. And don't forget to check out our salary tools to ensure you're getting paid what you're worth. Side effects may include a new job, increased confidence, and a brighter future. Consult Monster.com today and take the first step towards your new career. Ready for your next job opportunity? Visit Monster.com now.